Over the past, I would say about the past 10, 15 years, there's been an influx of funeral directors or funeral undertakers in South Africa. And the problem with most of them being is that they are what we refer to as fly-by-nights. In other words, they are non-compliant. Now, to be a registered funeral service provider in South Africa, there's certain laws and requirements that you need to adhere to. Some of them being that you need to have a certificate of competence. In other words, you have to have your own mortuary facilities. And it's in fact stated in the National Health Act that outsourcing of these facilities is strictly prohibited. Now, what these fly-by-nights are doing in the one instance is that they are renting mortuary facilities from other places. In some cases, they aren't even. And what happens is when they call a bereaved family, in other words, a family that have just lost a loved one, that family thinks that they are being taken care of, but they have absolutely no idea of what's happening behind the scenes. We've got instances where families are absolutely being treated with the utmost disgust and disrespect. And, unfortunately, as a family, you trust the service provider that you contact to take you through this process. So that's one of the aspects I would say is the mortuary facilities. It's absolutely undignified, and everyone wants to give their loved one a dignified service. So the general public isn't aware of this. So there are a few things that they need to insist on, specifically when they choose a funeral service provider. One of them being a certificate of competence displaying the service provider of their choice's registered name or trading name. It can't be someone else's certificate. What happens a lot, and this is what we're seeing more and more in our industry every day, is that we're getting funeral parlors popping up and they are creating their own funeral insurance products, but they don't belong to an underwriter or an insurer or anything of the sort. So what's happening at the end of the day is they're collecting these premiums. Eventually, 3 or 4 months down the line, or let's call it a year or two down the line, they get 4 or 5 claims, they can't honor the claims, and they disappear. In other words, there's no regulation on these guys in the industry. So they've collected premiums for a certain period of time. All their clients then suffer financial loss because these guys simply just close and move because they don't comply to the industry laws and standards. I would say the difficulty is everyone wants to have a dignified service. So obviously emotionally it's always a battle. So people obviously, they will always struggle with the emotions, but people are afraid either that they're going against their loved one's wishes or that financially that they cannot afford the send-off they would like to give their loved ones. So if a death occurs, the first thing that a family should do, or anyone in that situation should do, is obviously phone the Mosaic Funeral Group, and we take over everything from there. We are literally with the family from point A to Z, so we do absolutely everything. And I think it's very important to stress that all that they should worry about is their personal healing. The grieving cycle is extremely difficult to go through. It's very personal for everyone. And we personally believe, and that's why we do everything, from start to finish. We feel that they should immediately start taking care of themselves, process what has happened, and start that healing process. So just to explain then, obviously, the procedures that would follow is once they call us, obviously we come and we take care of everything, from collecting the deceased, storing the deceased in our state-of-the-art mortuary facilities, and then from there we'll either do the arrangements in the comforts of their own home or at our offices, whichever they prefer, and that's where we guide them through the whole process. We explain exactly how the processes work, whether it be a burial or cremation. We explain the paperwork that goes along with it, and we get everything in place. Should there be policies for them to claim, whatever the case might be, we arrange all those documents. So after we've had our consultation with the families, they'll know exactly what the process is going forward. They'll be kept up to date with everything. But bottom line is, they should worry about their personal healing. We take care of absolutely everything. So obviously I would recommend, going with a reputable funeral director or funeral parlor. The problem is, how do you know who's reputable and who's not? Especially because, especially when we spoke about fly-by-nights, these things are happening behind the scenes. And the public isn't aware of exactly what is going on. So I think it's essential, obviously, before you enter into this partnership, if you want to call it that, especially when taking out a funeral policy, because that's what it is. We see you monthly, we interact with you, we build a relationship. So you need to make sure that you're comfortable with the funeral service provider that you're making use of. You can do that either by obviously doing your own research, by attending some of their services. Obviously, if you've, most of the time when people do join a funeral policy of yours, it's because they've actually seen the standard of service that you uphold. uphold. But as I said, one of the things that I find important is family should have the choice to be able to walk into a place and to demand to see where their loved one is being kept, to see what conditions they are being kept in, and that's why we have an open door policy when it comes to that. Anyone is more than welcome to walk into our facilities at any time and tell us they want to see the conditions that their loved one is being kept in. And I think that's a very big thing, that people should insist on when making use of a service provider, even before that time comes. So that when they make that phone call, that they know that this service provider that they're making use of, that they've been to the facilities or they know the standards of the facilities as well as their services. It's extremely important, obviously, to make use of a compliant service provider. At the end of the day, you just don't know what conditions your loved one is going to be kept in and how they're going to be handled. So I would say that the most important thing is just to make sure you do your research on that service provider and then to make an informed decision. The grieving cycle specifically is so personal. Everyone grieves in their own specific manner, and there are certain factors which influence this grieving cycle. And of course, when losing a loved one, firstly, there's financial strain because now you need to, especially if you don't have a funeral policy, you now have to plan for this funeral and it's going to cost money. Where's this money going to come from to cover these costs? That's going to put excessive stress on that person. Obviously, now they need to be dealing with the loss of their loved one. They need to be focusing on their mental healing, from this loss. And now they've also got the financial stresses that go behind it. So I think it's extremely difficult, especially if you haven't made financial provision and you lose a loved one. And I think even more so, obviously, is what if it's the breadwinner of the family that's passed away? That's going to cause so much more extra and, in my opinion, unnecessary stress, from where someone could have made financial provision, for example, by taking out a policy. So in South Africa, the average funeral, I would say, costs anywhere between about 15 and 25,000 rand. And that's if you're talking about basic funerals. In other words, you're using a standard coffin, standard flowers, standard pamphlets or programs. A lot of people would like to have the option, and as I mentioned, a lot of people want to do a service with dignity, and I'm not saying that that's not a basic service isn't a funeral with dignity, but they want to upgrade the flowers, they want to upgrade the coffins, they want to use caskets instead of normal coffins, and then you're looking at prices in excess of 25, 30,000 rand. About 6 years ago, I started offering bereavement training to the Netcare group, a few of their hospitals. So what I do is I go into the hospital facilities and I train their nursing staff on how to deal with the loss of their patients in the hospital. One of the things that I found through my experience in the industry is that the nurses get their training, they know how to change drips, they know how to draw blood, they know how to take care of a patient, but should they be in the unfortunate circumstance where one of their patients pass away, they don't know how to deal with that, personally, and they don't know how to interact with the family that have lost a loved one. And that's what I focus on with this training. It's absolutely free training that I offer to the facilities, but I go there and I teach them exactly, and I stress the importance of them being the first line of support for these families. Before we get involved as funeral directors, they are the first line of support for these families, and I teach them exactly what the bereavement and grief cycle is so that they understand in their personal capacity as well, because sometimes they do build up a relationship with these patients. And when that patient passes away, obviously it will affect them in their personal capacity, but also in their professional capacity as a nursing staff member. They need to be able to effectively communicate with someone that has lost a loved one. So that's what I focus on during the training. But I think what makes the Mosaic Funeral Group so good is the fact that we've got a national footprint. We're the second largest funeral service provider in South Africa with more than 100 branches nationwide. And each branch is individually owned and managed. So I think one of the contributing factors to our success and the standard of service which makes us so good is the fact that the owners run the business themselves. Now, obviously also because we have a national footprint of over 100 branches nationwide, what's nice about the Mosaic Funeral Group is regardless of where you are in South Africa, if you have a query or if you have any service-related needs that you need to be attended to, there will be a Mosaic Funeral Group branch near you. And I think that's what also sets us apart from the industry. Yeah, it's difficult, you know. It's difficult to say that, to try and give a message to say that emotions don't play such a big role, because they do. That's our work. Every single day of our lives, we work with people that have lost loved ones, so we work with their raw emotions. I refer to it as emotional amputation. We often say that, when we lose someone, a part of that loved one or part of you is left with that loved one. And I refer to that as emotional amputation. So it's like a part of your emotions that have been either cut or ripped away, and it's extremely difficult. We deal with these people on a one-on-one basis. So the difficulty is we take this home with us. Unfortunately, because it is our jobs and we do care, you can't be in this industry and not connect with people and not be there for them emotionally. If your phone rings at 2 o'clock in the morning, you need to be there and you need to be able to deliver a service to that client. So the thing is, the advice that I would give to anyone else in this industry is that if you do feel that it is catching you, or if you do feel that you are getting down or that you're getting too attached to a certain type of emotion, is to seek help. There's nothing to be ashamed of when it does happen. We do invest a lot of ourselves into our clients, and obviously that means that some of their emotions are going to rub off on us, and we do take home some of the negativity, if you want to call it that, when you're speaking about their emotions. As a funeral director as well, you obviously, you can imagine, you see things that no other people see out there, except for maybe your paramedics and so forth. So when it comes to your emotional health, I would say definitely, if you do feel that it is catching you, there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of in seeking help and to talk about it, and just to look after your own mental health as well, because you are that pillar of strength in most cases for families that come to see you.